Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 26th edition of the Education Leadership Forum focused on transforming education for human and planetary flourishing. Thank you for being here with us on a weekday to attend the distinguished global lecture featuring Dr. Karen Collett. We deeply appreciate your presence and participation. My name is Aryan Salman, and I'm here to welcome Dr. Karen Collett on behalf of the Global Citizenship Foundation. It is my immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Collett. Uh, Karen is a senior lecturer in educational leadership and management at the Faculty of Education at the University of Western Cape in South Africa. She is the, the University of Western Cape and South African coordinator for an Erasmus project titled Teacher Wellbeing and Diversity, Managing Language and Social Diversity in Classrooms, which was conducted in between 2016 and 2019. She has worked in the areas of school and teacher development through nonprofit organizations and higher education institutions in South Africa and Namibia. She has particular interest in teacher well-being, school leadership development, and the development of schools as thinking and learning organizations. We will be sharing her handbook for school communities on promoting holistic well-being and holistic well-being of novice and student teachers towards the end of the session today. But before we formally yield the floor to Karen, I would like to recap. I would like to share a recap of the sessions that we've had so far. The panel discussion and the Ed Leaders meetup that we've had, we had our panelists, Gloria, Pooja, and Radha, who discussed the imperative to support teacher well-being as a must-have in order to achieve the true purpose of education, which is indeed human and planetary flourishing. The panel also outlined the importance of community and collective leadership and support networks to sustain the motivation for teaching, as well as to engage in lifelong learning. Moreover, we all agreed that policy interventions are essential for bringing a systemic change to create supportive spaces for educators overall. Today, we will delve deeper into leadership imperatives in enhancing the occupational well-being of teachers in VUCA times, that is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I formally yield the floor to Dr. Karen and welcome her to present her Global Distinguished Lecture. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Aryan, and also thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It's a great privilege, and I really hope that the presentation is going to provide a lot of food for thought and discussion between us. I have planned the presentation for about, say, 30 minutes, and then I'm hoping in between we will be able to engage during the session, but also after the session, and I really look forward to it. So I'm going to ask permission for everyone if I'm going to mute my camera just to help with my transmission, and then I'm going to share my screen with you. So I hope that I will be able to not speak too fast, that everyone can actually hear me, and also that we have an interactive time. So I'm going to then begin the slideshow. So I've given the title to the session today, the lecture today, with a focus on leadership imperatives enhancing the occupational well-being of teachers in VUCA times. And I think we've all experienced globally what those volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times are. And I'm going to try and bring the focus into what that then means for how leaders need to take leadership to actually support the well-being of their staff. And I'm hoping that we will share ideas from a range of perspectives today. So thank you once again for inviting me to do this lecture. So I'm going to begin by giving a little bit of focus on teachers and how teachers matter. And then I thought it would be useful to look at defining the term teacher well-being, because it's a very complex construct, and it's useful in being able to know what we're thinking about when we're then thinking of building capacity for well-being. I will then share some international imperatives related to the role of leadership in addressing teacher well-being during these complex times. And I'll share some lessons learned in the work that I've done and the research I've been involved in terms of building capacity for teacher well-being. And then I'm hoping that some of the recommendations I share with you would be useful, but I'm also hoping that you will, in our discussions and questions raised and from your own practice, share some of the recommendations that you have when we have a question and engagement session at the end, where I hope you will also highlight a number of suggestions. So just to start off with, I love this quote by Chris Day, and they did a lot of studies in Britain around the well-being of teachers and longitudinal studies. And in 2007, and that's a long way before our COVID pandemic hit us all, they said that teachers matter. They matter to the education and achievement of their students, and more to their personal and social well-being. No educational reform has achieved success without teachers committing themselves to it. And that's a very telling quote, because in the field of work I'm in around educational change in schools, we know that at the end of the day, all school leaders have to draw on the capacity of their staff to enable reform or change to take place. And if staff aren't looked after and they're in a state of depression or anxiety, they're not able to give that extra bit of support, and they're not able to really engage with what is required for them. The little poster that you see on the one side, it links to a project that I was involved in with Education International, as well as the South African Democratic Teachers Union, where we started to try and understand how we enable the care for teachers, because caring teachers and strong teachers are then able to care for learners and hold them in a range of biopsychosocial ways and in terms of excellence in teaching and learning. So I think within the context of a range of challenges around HIV and AIDS, this was before the pandemic, and volatility in school communities, it was really essential to actually focus on the well-being of teachers. Maybe I'll give you a little bit of time just to have a look at this quote. And hopefully in your discussions, you can see if you agree with it. So there's a doctor looking at a teacher's x-ray, and he's quite interested that her heart is slightly bigger than the average human heart, and linking that to the fact that she's in the teaching profession. And I think it's quite an interesting thing that, you know, the type of job that we have as educators and teachers, it's what we call an affective profession. We are relational. And in some of the studies that Chris Day and others have done, they talk about the multiple interactions teachers have. And I thought it was quite inspiring to look at what motivates people to go into teaching. And this is a quote from one South African educator. And she said, "I'm able to do what is right at all times. In spite of everything that is being said about my career, that teachers are lazy, I feel that by the work that I'm doing, I'm contributing to a new and better South Africa. This is what I'm doing for my country. I'm building citizens." So a real commitment to the love of teaching, but a broader political commitment to actually the socialization role that teachers have to developing future citizens. Another interesting book that I read, and that was some time ago, it was already indicators out there of teachers finding it difficult to cope with the context that they are in. So in 2008, these two authors already commented that teaching has to rise to the challenge of a world in which the pace, nature, and contexts of learning have been radically transformed. So I just thought it's interesting looking at that quote. That was then with the advent of technology, the fourth industrial revolution, and all the implications, as well as the increased pace the nature of the environment that teachers have to work with in terms of their occupation. So if we just have to think of it now, what has shifted? And I've got a question up there is, what has changed in the educational field for teachers in the last 15 years? So 15 years ago, they were already saying teachers are under pressure, they're moving out of the teaching profession. What are we going to do to try and address this? We have to think of, that was before the pandemic time, that was before we've engaged now with the extreme pace that technology has accelerated our work into. It was before the pandemic when we were having to now address a complexity of issues in our teaching and learning and in schools. So there's a question here for all of us, but it's a question to people that are in senior leadership positions in schools and leadership in other levels of the system. It's how can leadership at schools and other levels of the system ensure that the well-being levels of teachers are maintained and built? And I just want to ask the backup team here if they could just pause a little bit and maybe allow all of you to go into small breakaway groups of about 4 people to just ponder this. How has the field shifted in the last 15 years? And what do leaders in schools and other levels of the system need to do to maintain and build the well-being of teachers? So maybe sharing some of the things that you've already gleaned from the engagement that we've had over the last couple of days. So I just want to check that everyone can hear me. So good.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Just want to
Yes.
check that that's fine. Okay, super. So we are going to take some of your feedback and engagement. I think you must have had very exciting sessions meeting each other and sharing ideas. We're going to take your input at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue giving input and sharing some ideas with you. And then we're going to, in the question and suggestion session at the end, we're going to have an open engagement. I hope that's okay. So one of the assertions I make is that teacher well-being promotes school community well-being and also is a reflection or an indicator of levels of school community well-being. So maybe just that's something for people to ponder on in terms of the different contexts that teachers are located in. So if I can share a few ideas here with you from the literature, is that what we do know is that there's very little known about how teachers understand their own abilities to cope or not cope. There's a growing body of research about it, but I think it's a huge area that needs to be explored in a lot more detail from the perspective of teachers. We also know that the term well-being is poorly defined and under-theorized. But once again, with ongoing research, that area is being developed. And Juniper makes a very important comment, recognizing that if we don't understand what we're talking about, so for example, if we don't really have a clear idea about what well-being is or occupational well-being is, then it affects the kind of programs or the engagements that we work on in terms of trying to address or support with the well-being of teachers. So some of the work that's been done, and there's a line of research and literature, would be around the work related more to kind of learner well-being, but there are key ideas that are shared from theorists such as Kona and Rimpele, where they speak about there's a need for us to look at both focusing on the things that don't work, but a really need to focus on what are the practices that we need to engage in to enhance well-being. So instead of just to focus on ill-being, rather bring the focus back to around well-being in changing what happens in school environments. So a focus on well-being, like at this conference, but generally in the literature and internationally, is being promoted because there's an increased level of dis-ease or unease and depression suffered by people in the educational profession, whether it's at a schooling level or at a higher education level. But there's a deep recognition that by focusing on the well-being needs of educators, we are supporting the well-being needs and the academic achievement levels as well of learners within our care. So Kitching and Van Rooyen, these are two South African researchers, they talk about the need to have a holistic well-being approach. And they also raised the critique that we can address the well-being of teachers in different ways. Sometimes it's ameliorative in the way we do it. That means things really stay the same, but we do a little bit of healing and support. Or we can engage in more transformative approaches to promoting the health and well-being of teachers. So I'm sure a lot of you have engaged, and I see there are a number of academics here as well in the audience, have engaged with the whole issue of trying to define teacher well-being. So there are a lot of terms that are used. We hear the word teacher wellness or wellness, and that is more an active process through which people are made aware and make choices to move towards health and wellness. And we also hear the term resilience, and that is useful in terms of thinking about what keeps teachers strong, what keeps them coping, or allows them to bounce back from difficult or adverse situations. So that's a useful concept that Day and colleagues have worked with. And then well-being is also framed in terms of the term of fortitude. So we'd speak about what is your internal strength? How do you build that inner strength and fortitude? So Graham and colleagues have understood that well-being is a multi-dimensional concept where you cover a range of aspects, and it links to things related to the health and well-being, but on a number of levels, not just at a personal level, but also connected to people, place, and their health, and generally a sense of connected to a sense of happiness and safety. So according to Coleman and other colleagues, well-being can be classified into 3 types: emotional well-being, and you might be able to think of your own intervention strategies as to focus on the emotional well-being of teachers, psychological well-being, or a broader state of social well-being. So here we don't see the issues related to kind of the context and the organization being defined in a clear enough way. When I asked teachers in 2010 what they thought well-being was, 10% of teachers felt it linked to their own physical and health or their psychological health. 8% of teachers linked it to their issues of safety, physical health and safety. But the majority of teachers linked well-being to their conditions of service. So the kind of school you're working in, what you are required to do, your contracts, and the amount of money that you got for doing what you did. Quite interesting that that is the case. So the term well-being, some of you may be very familiar with this, is the term that was worked with by Seligman, and an American psychologist. And he talks about well-being as a sense of gratification, but also a sense of meaning. So, when you feel like you're in that state of things are flowing and you're just in your zone, okay, but what you're doing is meaningful. And then Allard, a sociologist, looked at well-being more generally from sociological terms, in terms of one's sense of having, loving, and being. And then Kono and Rempele also worked on looking at issues related to learner well-being, and they linked learner well-being to the aspects of having, loving, being, and health in the school environment. My own research built on the work of Allard and Kono Rempele, and using a grounded theory approach. And what I came to was that these key dimensions of loving, so the relational aspects of your occupational life, having, that means, your own levels of the resourcing that you have access to, but also your own levels of competence in being able to address the conditions that you are placed in, as well as your own level of being, your sense of yourself, your own health and well-being, and then your sense of meaning. Those were the key dimensions that pertain to a sense of what related to well-being. And my own study looked at it within the school context, the dynamic of the organizational life of a particular school, as well as the broader system in which teachers are supported. What's quite interesting is, although my definition was on organizational or occupational well-being, colleagues in Finland have spoken about the definition of pedagogical well-being. So they've focused on more specifically the well-being needs related to teaching and learning, the teaching and learning process. And that their kind of framework looks very strongly at the relationship between the teacher, the learner, and the parent or guardian. So that little triangle is very central to that in the teaching and learning process, but it doesn't link more broadly to the occupational levels more broadly in the school. And then Chris Day and colleagues did very interesting research in England on, longitudinal research on the life phases of teachers. And what they came to was that when we look at well-being, we need to think of it in teachers are different life phases. So you can, when you imagine the novice teacher starting out, a teacher in their mid-career with different levels of responsibilities and their growing sense of identity into what makes them happy in what they're doing, and then teachers towards the later phases of their career where they're considering retirement. So he speaks this, what they found was it's really important to look at the different life phases and your own sense of identity as a teacher. So things like the passion for teaching, what motivates you to come into teaching. And very strongly, their study found is that, issues around teacher identity and autonomy were absolutely key to giving teachers that sense of well-being. And a lot of people have used Amartya Sen's capabilities theory to actually also inform an understanding of well-being. Something I've found very interesting more recently is the work of Saranen and colleagues that have come up with what they call a multidimensional model in terms of looking at occupational well-being. And here you've got 4 key dimensions. So they would look at, for example, what are the health and resources of employees? That would be one dimension they would look at in terms of improving when they want to look at the well-being of teachers. The other aspect is the functionality of the working community. So, for example, how does this particular school work? Is it a school in which people are happy? Is the leadership functioning well, etc.? And then another aspect they would look at is your own professional competence. So, for example, now with a lot of technology being used in teaching, it would be kind of upskilling of teachers, your own professional development. And then the last aspect would be the particular working conditions in that particular job that you're in. So what you expected to do, the kind of loads that you're carrying. And then more recently, a colleague of mine is working in the area of what she'd call holistic well-being in schools. So not just the well-being of teachers, but rather looking more broadly at holistic well-being of schools that covers both teachers and learners and looks at processes of engagement and relationality towards the greater well-being of staff. So aspects we can think about when we look at well-being, so the personal, professional, and contextual dimensions, as well as the broader macro and micro environment that the school is located in, all impact and influence the well-being of teachers. So some of the things I discovered in the work I was doing is that the key thing for teachers that really supported their well-being were caring and supportive relationships in the school that they were in the school community that they were in, but particularly in the staff community they were in, and with leadership in the school. And then the next level was teachers' own state of being. So that included their state of health and their state of professional competence, where they felt that they were able to actually take on the challenges of their job. To a smaller extent, it was then the working conditions in the school. For example, were schools safe? Did teachers feel that they were supported by other staff members? That they weren't teaching out of field, for example? And then the other dimension that's very, very important as well, but to a lesser extent than the dimension of relationship, was meaning, that teachers were able to find meaning and purpose in their job as a teacher and in their engagement with learners and colleagues and the broader school community. So these translate into the dimensions of loving, having, meaning, and being in the life of a teacher. And you'll see at the bottom, I've got two dimensions there. All of those things are in relation to the issue of the job resources that you have, and also then the job demands. So when people talk about stress, they will usually look at the relationship between the job resources any teacher has and the job demands placed on that teacher within a particular time frame. And if there are too few job resources and too many job demands, and the time frame is short, and that's usually a recipe for extreme stress for many teachers. So here's the definition I came up with in terms of what teacher well-being is. So an occupational well-being, it's a dynamic and holistic state of loving, being, having, and meaning in a teacher's personal and professional life as a result of being part of a school community, and this community's influence on the physical, social, and cultural environment and working conditions in support of teaching and learning. So the whole teaching and learning role is very, very central and coupled to teachers' notions of well-being. So like many theorists, I tend to work from an ecosystemic frame or thinking systemically. So thinking of all the interconnections between the individual, the classroom, the school, the family, the community, the broader society, and all of that links to where the teacher is in terms of national and global trends and forces that also impact on the life of the teacher, as well as the physical and biological and cultural environment within which the teacher is located or the school is located. So it becomes very specific and contextually located when we look at issues around well-being. So we know that the teacher's occupational well-being is crucial to achieving the goals that we have in schools or in classrooms, and also in support of learners from research done by a range of colleagues. We also know that what's very, very central are these notions of relationship and relationships within and between people within school communities. So emotions of care and support are integrally linked to the teaching and learning process. As we talk about teaching being an affective profession, it's those caring relationships. So, for example, if a child feels scared, a child's not able to learn. They go into trauma and shut down. But that requires a teacher to be able to engage in a caring and supportive manner with the learner and able to understand and see their needs. So we know that motivated teachers improve learner performance. So if teachers are feeling happy and well, they automatically are there to be able to support others. But we live in really, really difficult times, challenging times that require us to recognize what those challenges are, but also to look at how we respond to the challenges. And I think what teachers are feeling in their professional lives at the moment are some of the pressures of the broader neoliberal kind of and global trends in terms of the marketization and the managerialism related to education. So, what we're experiencing are greater job demands, often decreases in job resources, and an increased pace for performance and limited space for more and more authentic engagement. So that creates a very complex environment, often a very uncertain environment. And some of the pushback against that has been the whole focus on the slow movement. You'll think of, people may have heard about slow pedagogy, going back again and holding on to reclaiming space for true relationality. What we're also experiencing in teachers' lives globally is increased accountability, the whole notion of the audit culture, issues around far more openness to public scrutiny. For many teachers, increased administrative responsibilities. So you're accountable to the management of the school, you're accountable to the parents. And within it all, an intensification of workload and administrative workloads that often kind of take away time from the authentic teaching responsibilities and engagement that teachers like to have. There's also a huge increase in challenges to teachers' autonomy, with greater regulation happening in terms of how they teach, what they teach, and the pacing of that teaching, what they should have covered in the curriculum or the syllabus at a particular time. And that puts increased pressure on teachers because learners don't all learn at the same rate. And there are also things that happen in the broader environment for learners that often make it impossible for them to attend school. Okay, so we know some of the challenges around that with the COVID-19 pandemic, where some learners in more privileged schools and communities had access to technology. They didn't experience such a break in their teaching and learning process. There were hiccups and there were breaks, but not as intensive as for some children where there's a huge digital divide. So real challenges here in teachers, their own identity, feeling that they're being deprofessionalized. So I think kind of that kind of work identity challenge happening there. What we're seeing in the world are huge issues around conflict. I think one of the colleagues in a previous session talks about the Ethiopian Tigrayan war happening. And, we are very aware of war happening in the Ukraine. We're very aware of the war and the conflict happening in Gaza. And that trauma and conflict actually prevents learners from attending school. It prevents teachers from teaching. And the term scholasticide, in terms of the impact and fallout of that, of learners not being able to attend school, scholars not being able to continue with their learning. And that all has an impact on teachers that are wondering about what's happening to their learners, what's going to happen to their future career and their future learning. So we are in the context of often rapid and anticipated change. So we think of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to immediately shift into remote and virtual forms of learning. Although that was happening, it was intensified, but the pace of learning was also intensified. So knowing that it is uncertain, we don't know, it could happen again shortly. And I think the impact of that pandemic on teachers, a big disruption at the moment is generative AI, and I think we're feeling the first waves of that in terms of issues around assessment and what that means in terms of how leadership will support teachers to address and engage with issues around assessment and generative AI. And I think that all of that has often increased the pace of our workload expectations and the demands on teachers in terms of relearning, upskilling. So I think the digitalization of learning has its own tensions within it. Some people more open to it, some people hesitant. Older staff are often hesitant to engage in the range of technological platforms in supporting learning. But also what we're experiencing globally is the digital divide. So, those learners have access to electricity, technology, data, bandwidth. They are more privileged and supportive teachers in that way, whereas learners who don't have that access, who are poorer, who live in contexts where there are power outages, who don't have remote systems and computers and cell phones, are actually that digital divide is growing, and it's a huge concern globally. So I think we need to recognize that there's often that correlation between teacher dis-ease and those competing and very demanding environments that force teachers into that role where they actually the job demands outplay or kind of outperform the job resources, and that's where you get the tension setting in. There's also a need to retain novice teachers, so I'm involved in a lot of teacher development. So we develop teachers, put them out into the field, and what happens is a lot of novice teachers end up actually leaving the teaching profession because they feel there's not enough support. So it's about how do we retain teachers, develop teachers, and support teachers and look after their well-being. And I think we're still dealing with the effects of COVID-19, both in terms of learners having limited education during that time, having not had good grounding, being passed on to the next grade. So issues around achievement levels of learning, ensure that there's progression and also learner retention going into further grades. I think those all place increased demands and pressures on teachers. And we do have different school environments and different country environments and contexts. So we might be all affected by global warming, the climate change, but actually, if you come down to it, the particular school context and the environment that teachers are in all play themselves out in different ways in terms of the factors affecting the well-being of teachers. So once again, we can see that there are many factors. They could be personal factors, a teacher's own health, could be professional factors, teachers having to upskill, or teachers being forced to teach in a subject area that they are, that it's not in their field, what we call out-of-field teaching. There could be school-level factors in terms of gang violence that impacts on the school. It could be poor leadership and management or very autocratic leadership and management. There could be contextual factors, for example, in the school community surrounding the school, where there are issues of conflict, and that plays itself out within the school system. And then there could be systemic factors like broader kind of policy change or curricular change, and all those factors then come down to impacting on that teacher. So all those years ago, Chris Day and his research being done, he was saying then that actually for school leaders, you need to actually ensure that you establish school-wide structures and cultures which support teachers if you are to sustain their sense of agency, their well-being, and their effectiveness in different professional life phases and in different identity scenarios. So some important lessons for leaders. And it was very interesting for me to hear that in some of the engagements that we've had over the past week is that a lot of staff would speak about, but our leadership in our school doesn't even know about teacher well-being. They don't consider teacher well-being an absolute priority. And actually, there are no strategies put in place to support and acknowledge the well-being of teachers. So I just like to come at the aspect of looking at teacher well-being from a social justice perspective, because I know we speak a lot about inclusion. And, I think here we have to look at the broader impact of different dimensions on what allows us to live in equitable ways. So Gerwitz and Cribb talk about, when we talk about social justice, and I think teacher well-being is linked, I know it's linked directly to it. We talk about issues like who gets the goods, who has the resources, and how are those resources distributed? So, for example, if certain schools get greater resources than other schools or have access to greater resources than other schools, then we can't talk about social justice here. Because actually, if one school has more access to unbroken electricity supply, whereas another school has broken electricity supply, those conditions impact on your ability to do online learning. We also talk about the dimension of culture. And here one looks at in-school communities' cultural domination. So whose culture is dominant? One may there look at whose language is dominant, whose language or culture gets recognized or not recognized, and how does that impact on the well-being of both teachers and learners? And then we also have to look at the whole issue of participation. So who is acknowledged as an insider, a participant in processes of decision making? And often we have to look here at things like, when we look at parents and their involvement in schools, is which parents are able to access even the meetings at school level. And when those parents do access those meetings, in what languages are they spoken to or considered? And how is their voice able to be heard? So I think, a social justice lens helps us to think in a more nuanced way about issues of well-being and teacher well-being. So a number of scholars argue for social justice leadership to be taken by school leaders. And they say that leadership for social justice involves identifying and undoing those oppressive and unjust practices and replacing them with more equitable ones. So maybe that links a bit back to the question I asked earlier on is, what is the role of leadership to actually address teacher well-being? So, there may be things that on an ameliorative level one can address, but actually maybe they aren't going to be transformative or already make a big impact at the end of the day. For example, issues around resourcing or issues around inclusion and exclusion. So, so Theo Harris talks about the need for addressing and eliminating marginalization in schools. So we know in our own practices that issues of racism or issues of xenophobia impact hugely on learners and teachers and their well-being. But if leaders aren't going to address that, then those issues perpetuate. So LGBTQI plus inclusion in schools, that's a huge topic at the moment, that needs to be addressed. And it means that their social justice leadership needs to be taken to look at how inclusion is promoted in terms of gender and orientation and sexuality in schools. So maybe another question to ponder is, in what ways can collective action be taken to challenge both internal and external conditions that perpetuate misrecognition, violence, and inequality? Just a thought there. So from my own work, we talk about, there's got to be a focus on promoting personal, professional, whole school, and systemic level well-being. And strategies to support teacher well-being have to be looked at all those levels if we need to address them and also have a multidimensional approach. And that leaders need to support that at a range of levels. So I know when some of us think of our own practices, we might be able to locate them specifically at some levels, but I think that there's need for a kind of a holistic view of that. So some activities that we've found important in enhancing teacher well-being is, first of all, stating that the focus needs to be kept, and for us specifically, on teacher well-being, but within that, more broadly, the holistic well-being in the school. That we need to integrate teacher well-being into our day-to-day practices So if we think of the professional development, the curriculum leadership practices in the school, developing the school culture, looking at the vision and mission of the school, we need to see it as infused within that and not something that stands apart from it. And you send your teachers off to a wellness day once a year and think they're going to be okay, or send them off for team building once in a blue moon. But that rather that and a focus on teacher well-being has to be infused into the day-to-day practices and life of the functioning of schools as we infuse the well-being of learners also into that life. So once again, I think it's making the same point. It's got to be integrated into school level structures, integrated into school level plans, and integrated into school level practices in an ongoing way. And I think that's where the senior leadership has a very, very strong role to play in enabling that. So a lot of research has been done around, the key role of the principal, but also the role of senior leadership in taking social justice leadership, but also having a commitment to promoting the values and practices that actually create that school culture, where the school culture can become caring and the practices can become more relational and supportive over time. So I know people have spoken about policy. So once again, we usually find that at school level, the policy related to the well-being of teachers is very weak. But in a way, there needs to be both policy at the school level, but at other levels that helps to support teachers. So one of the examples here is that we have a school health, an integrated school health policy. And within that policy, there's a very, very strong focus on the health and support for learners, but very, very little mention of any health and support and policy directives in relation to teachers. So it's a little bit like, teachers are on their own, but they're there to support learners, but not that teachers aren't considered within that. And the same way, when we look at issues around language policy, we have to look at how our language policies impact the well-being of teachers and think of them in a more constructive way in terms of the type of multilingual language policies and policies around translanguaging. They're all linked to the well-being of teachers. I think one of the key things is enabling teachers to act as change agents or champions around supporting their well-being, and also to draw in external change agents. And I think here of all the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and other organizations that can come in to support and build capacity for the well-being of teachers. So when you look at the well-being of learners, also look at the well-being of teachers. I think there's a big need to make sure that the job load of teachers are allocated fairly, and that teachers, especially novice teachers, are given a better head start to make sure that they're doing more in-field teaching, and that also the inclusion of teachers and learners is supported more in schools. So building teacher agency and leadership, I know one of the issues teachers raise about impacting their well-being negatively would be very autocratic, authoritarian leadership practices by senior leadership, rather than building teacher leadership and agency. So a key point within that is strengthening that bond and relationship with parents in terms of supporting the learner and their achievement, so that the burden of the learner achievement levels is not sitting solely on the teacher. And I think that's within the South African context, that's often what we find, is that the teacher is often carrying the major responsibility and also the major accountability at the end of the year when learners don't perform well, that they will come back down to the teacher and say, well, why aren't your learners performing well, or why haven't learners passed, without looking at the broader picture, the broader context that has impacted on the life of that child and the teacher over the year. So some of the global imperatives, I would argue, is that we need to understand that we know that schools are sites of socialization. There's a lot of policy around health promotion, but I think there's also, if we just look at the Millennium Development Goals, it's about building social cohesion and inclusion. And when leadership takes that on seriously, we actually then build that relationality. So looking at the health and well-being of our school communities in a more holistic way. And here we know that senior leadership can play a key role in mentoring and developing and empowering staff. And it is their responsibility to create schools as healthy, safe environments within which teaching and learning can occur. So, Michael Fullen, who's written a lot around change and educational change, talks about leaders actually walking the talk. And I would kind of add further to this, walking the talk of well-being in the way you interact and engage with staff and what you promote within the school in terms of a caring culture and ethos. I think also for leaders to be more actively involved in the curriculum and instructional leadership, because that is at the heart of what causes teachers a lot of stress or makes it difficult for them to cope, is that often the very senior leadership aren't directly involved and that they need to be more proactive in those areas. And I'll speak a little bit about more just now about some strategies. So one of the key activities or actions that have been researched but also shown to play a huge role in the well-being of teachers is to have teachers engaged in professional learning communities such as the one that we're in now, where in your schools you're inquiring into your practices, you're supporting each other, you're problem solving, whether you're doing it face to face or you're doing it virtually, as we are now in a virtual learning community. But the need for senior leadership to play a far more active role in supporting that learning and engagement in a constructive and supportive way in those communities. So I think, Andy Hargreaves speaks a lot here about, the role of digital learning and technology and the need for leaders to develop their expertise around the use of an engagement of technology in the teaching and learning process, but also be really informed about the range of technologies you're drawing in. And, we just have to think now of all the large language mechanisms such as ChatGPT or generative AI and the effect that they have. So it requires leadership to be on top of that and actually to be providing the guidance and support to teachers in actually looking at how they engage with that in learning and assessment processes. So what I found is that curriculum and instructional leadership focus is central to enhance the capacity for teacher well-being. So, coming back to your role in terms of going back to teaching and learning and what inspires teachers in their teaching and learning, what will help them best to cope with the new demands coming towards them with things such as generative AI, and also really bringing the joy and delight back into teaching by looking at different pedagogical styles, different pedagogical approaches, and how that can enliven the teaching and learning process to make sure that learners are more active, engaged learners, and teachers are able to cope and enjoy the learning and teaching process more. So I think you need holistic and systemic interventions over the longer term to develop teacher well-being. They need to be contextually specific, but also the generic strategies we can draw on. I think, so it's locally applicable, but, maybe globally, you could find relevant ones that apply to your own context. So, you need to think both locally and globally when you're looking at strategies. What I found particularly useful is the work of Joan Tronto, and she talks about the dimensions of caring and a political ethics of care. So she speaks a lot about the small day-to-day practices of building attentive relationships of care, support, and agency. So there may be some of you that be interested in doing that and having a look at that. And I would say that relationships of care and solidarity help us to build hope and optimism. So I think if I had to say to leaders, this is what you do, is move in and build a caring and supportive staff culture. Create safety in your school environment, but also build then hope and optimism, even although you're facing present difficulties. But I think that caring and solidarity is key, and you need to focus in on the teaching and learning program and help teachers with that. So, particularly in South Africa, we've got a concept, it's a philosophy, the African philosophy of Ubuntu. It means it links very strongly to that we will get ahead and we grow and develop through working together and supporting each other. We need to stand on the shoulders of each other and hold each other and support each other, because no one develops in their own right. We all are interrelated and interdependent. And it's really about putting that philosophy into practice in our school context. For some of you that are interested, there's quite a lot that's been written on Ubuntu pedagogy. And it's about how we actually, in our classrooms and in our staff rooms, actually work with that enhanced notion of really caring and respect for each other, because we know that we are interdependent and our lives depend on each other. So some general strategies would be, say, be conscious of when you think of developing plans for the well-being of teachers. Look at the different life phases that teachers are in. So novice teachers would need different kind of support than a teacher that's maybe 2 or 3 years in before their retirement. And think of also their life trajectories and how you support them in a long-term and differentiated way. Here we need to look at the role of senior leadership in providing that support, also creating the environmental conditions and school culture that promotes safety, care, and development and learning. So I think, holding that basket, it's a complex, multidimensional basket, but that's where senior leadership has the authority and the responsibility of creating that safety and holding context in the school within which teaching and learning can take place. So prioritize, I would say, time and space for meaningful engagement and dialogue in professional learning communities, because you find a lot of problems that are solved through that engagement, a lot of ideas are shared, and teachers feel empowered through those engagements. Also give holistic support. So think of the range of dimensions on which you provide support in your school, but also help teachers to take agency. And I think, and what it also means is that some of the issues you can deal with in the school, but some of the issues that you have to advocate for change in will require leaders going out of the school, moving to the district, moving beyond the district, probably to engage with teacher unions to lobby and support and advocate for change at different levels. So just in summary, I'd say take social justice leadership in addressing the needs for care and hope, institutionalize support for teacher well-being through school level structures, integrate that into your school level planning, like your school improvement plan, as well as your evaluation, and identify and capacitate teacher well-being champions to promote teacher well-being. Integrate a focus on teacher well-being within your current health promoting schools activities and initiatives. Look at having a whole school development focus. That means you work with all the dimensions of organizational life that you need to plan for, but also that you work with all stakeholders and build partnerships of care and support. And I think here we need to look at both pre-service and in-service support to support the well-being of teachers. So by the time teachers come into service in schools, we at a pre-service level have actually helped them understand the concept of teacher well-being, help them to look at some of the self-care strategies they could use, but also to be aware of some of the strategies that can be used within schools to build teacher well-being. So I think what's key here is ongoing professional learning and networking. And I'd like to end off once again back with our questions. How do we strengthen care and support for our teachers so that they can better support the well-being of learners? And what can school leaders do? And I hope that's given you some ideas or some handles we can engage in a conversation with. And I'm going to open up now for questions and comments from the group. So if we can go back into plenary, maybe just to say, I think I'm hoping to have a nice engagement with you. And I hope the resource that I share with you will have some strategies and ideas that you can learn from. And please also add to this resource as a growing resource. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing at this point. Okay. So a lot of wonderful comments shared on the comment platform. The Teacher Foundation, I see, has got some pioneering work. Yeah, so let's open up for questions and comment. Or, you know, so I know you had some nice engagement in your groups. I don't know if anyone would like to raise a question. Just looking at the chat. Let's have a look. Okay.
Thank you so much for that engaging and interesting lecture, Karen. Really, really appreciate your thoughts. Am I audible?
Yes, very clear. Thank you.
So, Karen, I have a question to do with mental well-being. You've worked with nonprofits and you've also worked with higher education institutions. What do you think are some of the impediments to mainstreaming this dialogue on mental well-being of teachers? Because every time we talk about the well-being of teachers, the conversation centers around what's the benefit for students and how would it go about it. So meaningfully, what are the things that you think are stopping us from what do you call enabling learning spaces to also be thriving spaces for educators and not just for learners or uh, for a small group of people, right? So what do you think are the impediments and how do you think we can navigate through them? So that would be my question to you.
Okay. Well, I'll give it a shot from my experience, and I'm hoping other people will also add in. You know, I think what's very interesting to me often is that people, when you bring up the issue of teacher well-being, you know, whether it's with the district or within a school, there's this notion of as a teacher, that's your responsibility. It's an individualistic responsibility or an individual responsibility. It's not a collective responsibility of the school. You know, so if you have health problems, go and source your medical aid. Um, you know, so I think that the well-being of teachers has often been shifted off the agenda. So, but I would say what we found to be helpful, maybe not an impediment, but a strength, has been to start the conversation at school level between teachers and with teachers and management in their schools around, I use the word, what helps us to cope? What makes it difficult for us to cope? And, you know, some of those, you know, if you want to look at improving a school, if you just have to ask a teacher those questions, leadership will very quickly get an idea of all the stresses and all the strengths within the school environment. If you want to do a quick scan, and you know, and then it's about taking that conversation further to look at what do we do, what do we have agency to address in our school, what can we address, but what needs to be addressed at other levels of the system. So, for example, how the conversations have to link to conversations probably within teachers' unions that then lobby for issues around resources and policy change or the well-being of their members. So, you know, I think it's about looking at taking it to different levels. So some of the challenges that we've experienced are that when a lot of support services come into schools, they come into schools to support the learners, but they don't often come into schools to support the teachers. And that may be as a result of how, you know, policy has always been framed around learners and learner support, rightly so. But I think within it, there's a broader view has to be taken to it as well. So, you know, I think teachers have been very compliant mostly, and I think teachers accept a lot because this is we tend to take on more. We're caring professionals. We tend to take on more and to give more and to give more and to give more without being able to to, you know, hold ourselves better and say, this isn't my responsibility. I can't do this. I'm not able to do more. So I think it's about conversations in schools, conversations between schools, conversations on forums such as this one, but also about people that work at a district level, you know, in school support, needing to raise these issues at those levels. So at a district level, looking at, well, what do we as a district do to support the teachers in our schools better? You know, and usually what people tend to come up with is a well-being day, you know, where teachers are celebrated and whatever. I think that has value. I would say it's a necessary condition, but not sufficient. I think you have to have longer term plans and also to be able to strategize properly around where the stresses are. And I think often the stresses are around diminishing resources, increasing responsibilities and pressures on teachers, increasing numbers of learners in school. So I think those conversations, even just having those conversations in a school, do a lot to relieve some of the stress that teachers feel, and then to plan for strategies to look at addressing improvements. So I think both bottom-up strategies and conversations and also top-down ones need to take place. So that would be my take on it.
Uh, Again, like, I love the way you framed leadership as also a means for social justice and having social justice leadership. Uh, for educators, I mean, so like for school leaders, what are three things that they should know or do in order to ensure that they have solid foundations for teacher well-being within their school ecosystems?
I would think the first thing is you've got to put it on the agenda. Put teacher well-being on the agenda, and then elicit responses from your staff. What's helping them to cope and what's making it difficult? You know, and then work together with teachers and the broader school community to actually problem solve and look at putting in place strategies of how you strengthen and build well-being. You build it um, with a range of strategies. So I think those three things, you know, and I think one of the key things there is, you know, creating the time and space in an ongoing way for those professional learning communities to happen in the school and between and across schools, where you can actually inquire into how do we enhance our well-being. You know, that can be a key aspect, or you bring in issues that might be creating tension at a particular time, and you inquire into that. And through that process, I think what I found is through good relationality and dialogue and engagement, you can create the means and the agency and the problem solving around strategies to take things further. I think, you know, there are some contexts within which where the trauma is very high. So in contexts of extreme trauma, where it's difficult, and then you have to know how you switch your leadership role into you know, almost what they call warrior leadership. You're actually creating immediate, safe, and caring conditions to cope with what's directly being needed then. And that style might need to shift then to more kind of a more relaxed, inclusive style at later stages when that conflict or trauma isn't as much, isn't as prevalent. So, you know, I think it's being able to switch your style, but I think definitely around creating a caring culture. I think putting a caring culture on the agenda every single day. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for that one. I have another question from Owen Williams out here. Um, Their question is, in South Africa, we've had many specialist teacher training centers or colleges closed post apartheid. Do you think this has played a negative role in preparing teachers adequately for teaching, consequently adding to well being in a negative way?
Yes, I do. I think in retrospect, people have recognized that was it did a disservice to a lot of institutions, and also actually took us away from proper preparation for our teachers. I think those colleges often did sterling work. Um, um, yeah, so I think it did have a negative role, and And I think what is key is that really preparing our student teachers well to be to know what they need to do professionally to cope with some of the demands in the workplace. I think often we don't do enough in our teacher preparation to prepare teachers for the different contexts and conditions they can expect, and also for them to know that probably teaching is going to be a third of your work when you get into school, because you're going to have to do all this administration work, all this community engagement, all the capacity building, organization building in the school. So, I think we don't prepare teachers enough. So I think, very good teacher training, good content knowledge, good pedagogical knowledge. I think all of those things, but I think also preparing them to go into different work scenarios and know how to also look after themselves and support others. I think we can do more there.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Karen, for that one. We have a question from Dinesh Thapa, who is assistant principal at Kidney Secondary School, Lalitpur, Nepal. Their question is, could you share some light on the relationship between scripted curriculum or programs and teacher well-being? So the connection between scripted curriculum and teacher well-being, do you think pedagogical freedom is part of teacher well-being? Thank you.
Yeah, I think yes, I think it's a really nice question, and I think I think Day's work has shown a lot of that in terms of one's identity as a teacher. Part of what we thrive on is being able to be responsive to the needs and the complex needs in our classroom, and we should be pedagogical experts in terms of being able to design the best learning program or best learning approach to engage a learner, to address barriers to learning, and I think. What often happens is that where we have a very tight set curriculum, it constrains us and it almost deprofessionalizes us. It says, and I think an added injury to that is often where you get very prescriptive mandates to say by a certain time you need to have covered this and covered this and covered this and covered this. So I think there's too much focus on too much content, but less focus on the building of critical learning processes and thinking in our schools, and I think that's part of the broader picture. So I think yes, it directly impacts on teachers' well-being and their professional identity.
Thanks, Karen. Mark has raised his hand. I think he's here.
Hello, Mark.
Hi, Rekha.
Mark? Hi. Mark, we could hear you.
Okay. I'm assuming we lost connection with Mark, but the question that Mark, I think there's a question and a comment, if I'm not sure. There's great emphasis on teacher well-being in global north and south countries. That's primarily the West. But what about teacher well-being in non-Western countries where the term teacher well-being does not even exist and people are not even aware of what it entails?
Okay, so I happen to know that Mark is teaching in Brunei, and he actually is my PhD student. He's going to be looking at teacher well-being within that context. But I think it wasn't so long ago. When I'm just thinking in 2010, when I started out, I was working with my doctoral research. Was that the term I was had to grapple around looking for the notion of well-being and teacher well-being. So there were concepts of well-being, but not teacher well-being, and that wasn't even on the agenda in schools. And we can see from things like policy now, 2018 policy, teachers and their well-being isn't even, it's the terms aren't even there. So it's wonderful that, through platforms such as this, that the notion, we're spreading information, we're growing that awareness, but it's about, the need at, I would say at a pre-service level, in our teacher development programs to bring in those concepts, to develop courses, to make our student teachers aware, and then in our schools, in our leadership development programs, to make leaders aware, and then to get this conversation and use, because if we don't have the terms and we don't understand the terms and the concepts, we can't start speaking about something and we can't make sense of it. It's almost like language gives us the ability to think and to strategize. The same thing with a concept like well-being. That's why I spend quite a bit of time at the start trying to grapple with understanding it. And I think, maybe Mark will know more about why there's less of a focus, but I'm not sure. I'm hoping that there are other researchers that can shed light on this. But I think it's part of it starting to pick up, and people are becoming more aware of this. And I'm hopefully that this will spread globally, because I think it's absolutely critical. Because we know from research that if teachers feel they're coping and they're excited about their work, they're able to engage learners in exciting ways, and there's a good correlation between the well-being of teachers and the achievement levels and excitement by learners of being at school and the work that they're doing. So I think it's absolutely critical, because we also know on the converse side is if teachers are ill and they are absent from school, it puts greater load on other teachers and less focus on the attention and support that learners get. So investing in the well-being of teachers is an investment in your capacity of your staff and your learner development and achievement levels. So it doesn't make sense not to pay attention to it.
Karen, I just wanted to add a couple of insights from my discussions, and also
Yes.
going through schools here in the European Union. One of the challenges that you face is mental well-being. Is from the interactions that I've had, educators, even in the most affluent countries, some of the best systems also have the same challenge. The only refuge that I see that a few educators have is the social security systems that are out in place, like say in countries like Germany. But overall, I don't know if there's as much emphasis on mental well-being, even in the global north. As we perceive it to be like a space where all of these discussions happen. I do teachers struggling. I do see teachers struggling with burnout. I see teachers struggling with a lot of issues that educators in the global south do face. And I was
Yeah.
surprised when I was interacting with educators here in Germany. The kind of challenges that they have are quite similar to the ones in the global south. So that was a stark
Interesting.
realization for me.
Yeah. Interesting that. And I think, the whole, if I think of us as human beings, we need human relationships. Even if we're very introverted, we don't like being with so many people. We need that human interaction. It's a little bit like, even online now, it's so much better if somebody puts on their screen, that you can actually see there's another person there. You can maybe look in someone's eyes, but they're not very close to you, but you can see someone there. You can see their movement in context. And I think, that's part of our ability to be humane and to be caring to each other and to form those deep relationships is is actually trying to making sure that those both online and face-to-face relationships happen in a more relational way. So now with, for example, I'm just thinking of generative AI. With generative AI now, I could easily say to a student or a learner, go and get feedback on your essay, put it through Chat GPT. As opposed to me looking at that learner's essay and sitting with them and going through it and saying, look at this, you can put it through Chat GPT, but actually it's another level of engagement at a higher level. And I think those social skills and abilities, I think we get so much energy from each other, and we it makes us healthy. It's like, some of the strategies say that you have to have some really good intimate conversations every day, one-on-one, with children, with family members, with friends, and that builds up your resources for well-being. So one of the good strategies I've seen school leaders propose is create a diary entry for every single staff member on your staff to come and have lunch with you one day in the month, or when you have a break in the school day, and just have an informal conversation with that staff member. Or even if you're teaching completely online, go online and put your camera off Put your camera on so you can see each other and engage, and have more of those easy informal conversations. So the personal is not separate from the professional. I'm not sure what has happened to our
Thank
host. I hope he's still here.
Yes, am I audible?
You
Yeah.
are? Yes. Okay.
Thank you for that one. So the next question here, I think Elsa has raised her hand, and then I'm going to ask for another question that's there on the Q&A section. So Elsa, the floor is yours for the question.
I unfortunately can't put on my camera. I have no idea what is going on. No one wants to see my pretty face tonight. Dr. Karen, you asked earlier, why is it that globally there is a teacher well-being group? And I think if we break it down, is that we don't often ask for help. And I think this comes back to the teacher. We need to break those barriers that if you ask for help, you are weak. We are not weak. We are the strongest people on this planet. Teachers are the backbones of every single job on this planet. And we are not weak, but we are human. And we need to say, stop. We need to be able to say no. It took me 54 years to be able to say no. So we need to do that. The problem is, and as one of our people said, he's in another country. Dr. Karen, you spoke about him. The problem is, if you're working in another country and you put on the brakes and say, this is too much for me to handle, very often, coming from a country at the moment, you will be replaced with someone who is more malleable. And that is to the detriment of the students. We are here for the students. And this is what people don't understand. If we advocate for the students, then we must advocate for ourselves. There's an old saying that say, if the mother is happy, the children are happy. And this is our children that we are talking about. This is not my students, it's my children. I care deeply about my students. But if I'm not happy as a teacher, if I'm under stress and I cannot cope, I cannot teach and I cannot deliver on the level that my students deserve. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Also, very nice feedback. I think you're the person that was online, I think on Wednesday, and you are in Pakistan. Is it Pakistan? Is that right?
No. I'm in Vietnam.
Vietnam. That's right.
Yeah.
I did see you, so I just wanted to say. But I think really important points. And what I have seen, Elsa, is in schools where, for example, a teacher on her own would say, I'm not happy with this. I can't cope with this. Often they can run the risk of being isolated and ostracized. It also depends on the school or the country culture. But where teachers stand together and hold each other's hands and actually say, we can't cope, in a phase or a subject area, it makes their claims stronger, and it's often harder then to victimize individuals. So I think, it's very important point you're saying about no. We actually have to say we need to be supported. We can't take on more. We need to help each other. I just wanted to come back. Jack has got a question. He says, how can mentoring and peer support networks be effectively utilized to foster a sense of community and resilience among novice and student teachers, particularly in managing the challenges of their new role? So, Jack, I wanted to say, it's like I really wished you would answer your own question. That was my, because basically it's a lovely question, just to say that I think mentoring, I think those roles, those communities. So, what I was speaking about in terms of a professional learning community, I think it's very important to form those communities and those support networks within schools. You might have smaller kind of buddy groups, which I've seen working very well, especially among new novice teachers with a mentor. So I think they definitely they are critical. They're absolutely essential, and that one has them. And because I think it's really tough being a novice teacher, and all the challenges you have to face. So sometimes a novice teacher is paired with a mentor in a school and they have some induction. Doesn't always take place. But I think the more important thing is what you're mentioning. They need to be part of a community. They need to be part of a bigger group of maybe other what we call novice teachers in their first 5 years, and that they share with each other and mentor each other and get the support they need. But I think one can do that both in school, and you can also create online networks and links as well. I don't know, Jack, if you want to add anything more to that.
All right. So am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible, Karen?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that response, Karen. Before you take the next question, I'm going to ask one question, which is quite your own personal experience. You can either answer it right away or maybe towards the end. So my question is, what was one of the most inspiring, initiatives that you have come across in the domain of mental well-being of educators or fostering mental well-being? Oh, you can give more if you'd like to.
You know what? For me, I think it's being part of a professional learning community where we were talking about well-being, and it was the sharing of ideas and the generation of ideas and strategies to how we could then take agency to make change happen. I think, just having those conversations, I mean, there are a number of things people can do, that have been exciting and fun, but I think the most generative and kind of that had long-standing results in the end were having those meaningful conversations about the things at school level that help you to cope or make it difficult for you to cope. Yeah, I would say that. And a bit of laughter therapy. Yeah. Maybe if I could just add in there is that, a nice strategy we'd use is before we'd engage in a professional learning community or even a meeting, is to have something what we call like a go around and check in. And sometimes staff members can do that at the beginning of a day, like just with a show of hands. I know some teachers would do that in classrooms. It's like they say, either give a thumbs up or go like this if it's kind of, or go like this. Tell us how you're feeling today. So you get a very quick barometer, and then people just do a quick go around. And in that way, you get to know your colleagues, and you also get to know who you're needing to be a bit more supportive to, or engage with in a different way. And I think if school leaders did that more, they would have a very quick barometer of how things are, that teachers don't bottle everything up. Yeah.
Okay. This Samantha's question that I want to share with you, I think the premise, I think you can also discuss the premise if you can.
Yeah.
So do you think that school culture can be transformed to prioritize and normalize teacher well-being without compromising the educational outcomes of students?
Mm-hmm. I think school cultures can be transformed, but I think it takes time, and it requires the will of people in senior leadership to help to drive that around, because they have a very strong hold on the promoting the cultures and practices and the rituals, and holding space for how work life is organized. So I think if there was the will, if there's the, I want to say political will, but if there's the moral will and the conviction by senior leadership, they can shift that around. But I think it's about transforming all, when you talk about changing the culture, it's about changing the values and beliefs within the broader school community, around, and putting probably the value of care and kindness at a key place. You know, you'll always hear the values of excellence, you know, and I think caring and kindness is key to a socialization outcome that you'd want. You know, if we're socializing the next generation, we're talking about building social cohesion, looking at inclusion and support. You actually, I don't see that as compromising educational outcomes. In fact, the research that's been done has showed that where there's attention to the well-being of teachers and where they are supported properly, that actually the ability to respond to learners and to assist learners and to be there for learners increases. So, you know, a happy teacher, happy child. You know, excited teacher, excited child. Confident teacher, confident child. So I think the care, I mean, I know one of the previous speakers that you had on talked about a key thing she would do is build hope. And I think for me, I thought about that, I thought actually, you know, but hope comes from caring and solidarity. You know, we can be hopeful if others, sometimes if we've lost all hope, if others have care and solidarity with what we're going through, I think that builds the capacity for hope. So I think, you know, caring school cultures are critical. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with that more, Karen. I think that is also one reason why I feel a lot more confident in myself. Like, as you know, having educators and having your peers who support you and
Yeah.
who are in solidarity with you, I think it's quite essential.
Yeah.
And my life's experience is also a testament to that. So thank you for sharing something so profound. Karen, I have one small segment now with you. Your
Okay.
message to each of the stakeholders. You're working on whole school approaches, and I think for us to be effective, we need to have all stakeholders buying into this idea and contributing to this idea of ensuring mental well-being of educators. So, in that context, Karen, what would your short message to say policymakers who are working in education? So, what would your message to them be who are listening or watching this particular global distinguished lecture? And then we'll go to a series of other stakeholders, but first for the policymakers.
You know, I think that that I think there's got to be more trust and respect for the professional autonomy of teachers and their ability to engage in good pedagogical practices. I think that is the one thing is that one thing that for me has been key in terms of, you know, enhancing the identity that, you know, their teacher identity and their professionalism. I do also know that there need to be checks and balances in the system, and I think maybe it links to the question that Denisha asked around, you know, the scripted curriculum programs. So you know, pedagogical freedom, you know, it's always within limits. You know, you have to achieve certain outcomes, you've got to achieve certain goals, but I think the ways in which you can and the pace needs to be more flexible and not as mechanistic and mechanical, because we're dealing with people in complex conditions. I think there has to be a caring from a higher level. You know, and it's quite a difficult question you ask, because it's not, you know, it's not just one strategy, it's not just one thing. But I think that, you know, that relationship again with the accelerated pace of that technology has brought with it, you know, in terms of response time, in everything, you know, expecting things, you know, learning takes time. Critical thinking takes time. Dialogue takes time. And I think we're losing the focus on what the educational agenda should be or the socialization agenda should be. So, you know, you've got these forces of the neoliberal marketization of education and all the push and the outcomes and grades. those are not, that's not everything that schooling is about and education is about. It's like, it's about the holistic development of the child. It's about developing good citizens, and it's about developing creative, critical thinkers. It's about developing citizens that are compassionate and caring and critical, that can raise issues. So I think, you have these different competing agendas um, that are out there. And policymakers will swing in either way depending on what the interests are. But I don't think a good life can be sustained without deeply reflexive and authentic relationships where we're learning how to think critically, we're learning how to think creatively, and we're learning how to be compassionate, creative, global citizens. So I think the bigger picture, and not extractive and exploitative. Yeah. So I think that's often where the educational agenda has gone to. It's being driven by those market needs and forces. And, privatization of education, and it's all about money making, as opposed to education. I think we could experience it in schools, and we experience it in higher education. So similar forces are out there. So I would say, remember that education and learning it takes time, and it needs to be a deep process, and it's a relational process. Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. I remember like when India came up with the new education policy, one of the segments that I was looking at is perspectives on assessments. How are you looking at assessments? How are you looking at teacher development? And I think one of the things that what you say is very right. There's a lot of push and pull in terms of textbook manufacturers and textbook companies having a hold on some of the things where teachers don't have that kind of flexibility. So you also have literally what you have to do is literally given out there, and there's very limited flexibility or maneuvering that's possible. So I think what you say makes a lot more sense, Karen, in the sense that bringing in change requires time, and we need to have a bigger picture. So, Karen, your message for education leaders who are participating in this conference, for school principals, vice principals, and leadership positions owning schools. So, what would your message to them be?
I think a similar message to the message that Chris Day had all those years ago was that teachers matter. Um, and they matter for all those reasons. They matter to enabling educational change. They matter to creating critical thinkers. They matter to creating responsible citizens. They really, and I think more and more, I suppose people are thinking about, you have this tendency to think, well, teachers could be redundant. We could just use Chat GPT, or we could just, farm it all out. Um, you know, and have textbook generated teachers that could teach you all the content. But it's not that, it's about the complexity of the teaching process and the socialization process. And I think more and more, teachers matter because we need expert pedagogues to actually help learners to engage critically with the complex context they have around them, and how they would rise to a future where we need to look at ourselves as global citizens that engage ethically and responsibly in sharing the resources of the planet and caring for each other. So I think those roles, and the whole issue of like inclusion and the special attention to people's particular needs. I think we have to go back to the need for deep level relationality and caring to ourselves and to our planet. So probably that would be the issue I'd leave with. Yeah, and teachers can help to make those links.
So my next question to you is about teachers. What should they be doing? Because I do see a lot of them are super passionate. They want to make a difference. They burn themselves out and still continue. And some of them, like, to a point of no return. So what would your message be for such educators, like, who are going through a lot?
Yeah, I would say the first thing you do is like look at your self-care needs. You've got to be aware, that self-awareness, that awareness of what your own needs are, what your limits are, and then you've got to, within your workspace, be able to, as Elsa was saying, is be able to negotiate where you can take on things and where you need to say no, but also to work collaboratively with other colleagues to actually lobby for and advocate for strengthened systems of support. So I don't think within this particular context that anyone's going to look at anything additional to give to teachers from an educational budget. They're expecting teachers to empty out their resources to extend their care needs more and more. You're playing all these roles, but I think it's about holding your boundaries, knowing your self-care needs, and then negotiating collectively what needs to happen in terms of your access to job resources and to to try and limit some of the job demands and advocate for your professional role. And stand as a team, stand as a collective. That's what I would say, yeah. And have those conversations around your well-being, put well-being on the agenda. So maybe leaders won't put it on the agenda, but teachers need to put it on the agenda. And that's where there's a lot of research being done around it. You can bring in other studies that actually show focusing on teacher well-being enhances learner well-being, enhances learner excellence and results, if you want to look at it in that line, to motivate your cause.
Yeah. And lastly, what's your message to, say, parents and the wider community um, on this question?
You mean to the wider school community or to the wider community in this forum?
I mean, the parents who engage with
parents.
students and the wider school community.
Yeah, I think it would be is that, to have respect for teachers and understand all the roles they're fulfilling, and try and look at how they also take more responsibility for supporting their child in order to support the teacher. Because I think what we've experienced, I'm not saying it's in every country, is that there tends to be a hands-off approach and that the teacher will be hands-on, and the teacher's classes sizes are increasing. They can't be that hands-on and that attentive to so many learners. So do your part as a parent to support the teacher and support the teacher as much as you can to support your child. Yeah. That's what I would say to the broader community.
Thank you so much, Karen. One of the things that I've been reflecting is if we can have some training and coaching for parents specifically to set their own expectations right. This I can tell you from my own experiences. Like when parents look at schools, many a times it's about the infrastructure that they have. It's about the facilities that the school provides and the kind of what do you call 5-star luxuries that a school has. That determines whether the school is good or not. And there's undue pressure on teachers. Yeah. So maybe perhaps I was just wondering, this is a question to all the educators or school leaders out here. What has your experience been engaging with parents and setting these expectations right? What should a parent expect from a school before they enroll the child, while the child is in the school, and while the child graduates from the school? So that's a question, Karen. I think we've had. Yeah, please share your thoughts.
Are you asking participants to share, or are you wanting me to share my thoughts on that in terms of limiting expectations? I think maybe just if I can make a last comment is I think, where there's a huge privatization of schools, parents are paying a lot of money. I think the price of education is getting more and more expensive. And at the end of the day, they're wanting bang for buck, and so they feel like they can monitor the teacher, moan at the teacher if their child, no matter what their child's abilities are, if their child's aren't succeeding at exceptional levels, it then becomes a blame being pointed to the teacher. And I think that's where the leadership in the school or the governing board in the school have to be very careful and very supportive and hold those boundaries for the teachers, in terms of what clear expectations are, because I think, those processes of being accountable to parents, there's more and more surveillance of teachers now and greater administrative work where you have to prove and you've got to show, for example, all the intervention support you gave, what the process was, how you've tried beyond any reasonable doubt to do the utmost in terms of providing support. But I think it's about, rather having productive conversations, relationships between parents, learners, and teachers, where it doesn't become an accusatory thing just about money and about results. It becomes about a more developmental relationship. What's happening here? But I think that's where the school leaders need to protect staff as well. So, you have certain accountability measures and performance measures, but you also need to provide that support for staff. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your experience, and your love for impacting the community, Karen. Really, really appreciate your time here. So as we formally close, just give me a moment. I'm going to formally close the session.
Yeah.
Thank you, and open the floor for people to informally engage post this session if they are interested. So I understand that we may still have many questions that may not have been covered or sufficiently answered in this panel, in this session. Your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, and your feedback, these are all valuable to us. So please don't hesitate to share them by emailing us or tagging us on your social media posts. Thank you, Karen, for honoring our invitation to deliver this global distinguished lecture and share your insightful and inspiring knowledge with all our participants as well as those who join us post this event. To the audience, thank you so much for staying with us throughout the 26th Educational Leadership Forum. We hope you got inspired and have had opportunities to exchange your thoughts and ideas and understand and develop strategies and best practices for you as educational leaders to create inclusive and supportive experiences for your peers and others. So please make sure that you join the speed networking session. It's a very interesting format session where you'll be matched one-on-one with the other participants. So you get to have an intimate interaction with the folks on 16th of July, 2024, to have a meet and greet from around the world. On behalf of the Global Citizenship Foundation, the Council for Global Citizenship Education, and all our attendees, I extend once again my deepest, deepest gratitude to our distinguished global lecturer for today, for taking out the time out of their busy schedule and enriching this discourse through their unique ideas, insights, and experiences. Also, thank you for being part of the Educational Leadership Forum and for everything you've been doing to advance the discourse on transforming education for human and planetary flourishing. We deeply, deeply appreciate your time, insights, and effort for all that you do to contribute to driving this extremely crucial discussion towards shaping the future or many futures of education. See you soon. Until then, take care, stay safe, and spread love and compassion. Our world needs it a lot more than ever before. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.